Welcome to the 2021 Active Transportation Symposium. Hello to all of you out there in the virtual world. Excuse me. I'm Jeannie Ward-Waller, the Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs at Caltrans. I'm going to be the MC for this morning kickoff session. We're so happy that you've chosen to join us here for the next 3 days. We have a really incredible lineup of speakers, talk about very important active transportation topics. This is our second Active Transportation Symposium. Our first one was back in October 2019 when we were still doing events in person, and it was a huge success. So we're bringing it back this year, of course, doing it virtually. Even with the challenges over the past year and a half, active transportation continues to be as important as ever, and we know you'll get a lot out of attending this event and meeting with your colleagues. Active Transportation Symposium is put on by the Active Transportation Resource Center at Caltrans in partnership with the California Transportation Commission and Sacramento State College of Continuing Education. So thank you to our partners in this event. The goals of the symposium are to bring together active transportation stakeholders, share information on relevant active transportation topics, and provide attendees with implementable solutions. The theme of this year's event is Connect, Visualize, and Transform. Each of the 3 days centers around one of these themes, and you'll see it reflected throughout the keynotes and panel sessions each day. I want to just get you oriented to this platform. On24 might be new for some folks, so let you know that Google Chrome or Firefox are best for optimal viewing. You might have figured that out already, hopefully. Due to the large number of folks that we have in attendance, everyone's camera, microphone, and the chat features have been disabled, but please use the Q&A widget to submit questions for our speakers. If you're having any technical issues, you can use the help widget. Feel free to explore the toolbar on your screen for other features. As an attendee, you can toggle your widgets on and off, and you can resize and open the different screens by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the window and dragging it larger or smaller. As a reminder, this session and all the sessions of the symposium will be recorded so we can share them with folks afterwards. And just so that you know what we're talking about, I think we have a screenshot on the next slide that shows you that Q&A box. So get oriented to that. We definitely want you to engage and ask questions of our speakers throughout the day. Excuse me. So just to open this event, I want to share, how honored I am to be here with you and to have the pleasure of kicking off the Active Transportation Symposium. For those of you who know me, you know how important this issue is to me. I started my work in transportation as an advocate for safe routes to school and also at the California Bicycle Coalition. I was able to learn from a real pioneer in the field, the passionate trailblazer, Deb Hubsmith, who founded the Safe Routes Partnership. And I was also lucky to be in California working as an advocate in 2013 when the legislation that enacted the Active Transportation Program was in development. So I feel like I got in on the ground in that program, and I really just care so much about what we've been able to create together with the Active Transportation Program, especially when SB1 was passed, nearly doubling the funding for that program. So it's fun for me to think about how far we've come since then, how much progress we've made. We've certainly done a lot to grow the interest and enthusiasm excuse me, and the funding for active transportation so much since then. We still have so much more to do. Obviously, we still have a lot of people who are relying on driving in California, even for those short trips that we want to become more walk and bike trips. We have gaps in comfort and connectivity that prevent seamless, convenient trips by walking and biking in our communities. So we have a lot more work to do to create those connected networks. And sadly, most tragically, pedestrian fatalities are really alarmingly on the rise, and traffic speeds continue to increase on our system. Luckily, we have a new tool to address that issue. I'm sure you all saw that Governor Newsom recently signed AB 43, which gives us a new tool in our toolbox to tackle speed management. And all of these challenges are, of course, bigger and much more devastating in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. I'm heartened by how much my agency, Caltrans, and others in California are really talking and thinking about equity. But talking and thinking are not enough. Our BIPOC communities must be centered in our plans and processes and co-powered in designing solutions that work for their communities. You'll hear a lot more on this morning from our brilliant keynote speaker, Monique Lopez, on how to do effective equity-centered planning. Monique is a great friend of mine, so I'm really excited to have Monique here to speak with you this morning. And I feel truly blessed to have a role inside Caltrans where I can advance and champion this work. You'll hear more from Toks in a minute here about how we're making great strides in many areas. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I do want to say that in my 4 years at Caltrans, we have staff all over the department now, including in every district, that are really focused on advancing complete streets and active transportation. I particularly love getting to work with and be on the same team with folks like our Chief Safety Officer, Rachel Carpenter, and also Acting Deputy Director for Sustainability, Tony Dang, who are longtime friends of mine in this work and real leaders within Caltrans. A lot to say about what we're doing at Caltrans, but just I want to highlight the active transportation planning work that we're doing in every district. We will soon have active transportation plans for all 12 that are really data-driven and grounded, again, in community needs. They will help us to advance projects over the coming years. We will be doing a lot more of that on and across the state highway system. And of course, I want to recognize and thank our team in the Division of Local Assistance that lead the Active Transportation Program Administration, particularly the Active Transportation Resource Center, and Emily and her team who are helping to put on this event today. Just really incredible work that they do in that program, very much behind the scenes, but they work so hard and it makes such a huge difference. So we have a lot more work to do, as I said at the outset, definitely here at Caltrans. We're continuing to shift the culture, but we've really come a long way, and I'm just so excited about what we've been able to do. And last thing I'll say is, the climate crisis, we saw record-setting rain in Sacramento this week, and so the climate crisis is kind of present and with us, it seems like every day now in California. So that just makes our work even more urgent. So I hope you'll, carry that urgency. And I know you bring passion for this work, but I hope you'll keep that with you through this event and the opportunities for sharing and learning that we're bringing to you. All right, thank you again to the team that organized the event. And with that, I want to shift to our first speaker. So very excited to introduce the director of Caltrans, Toks Omashakin. He was appointed to his role, excuse me, some stuff in my throat this morning. He was appointed to his role in October of 2019. He's been immersed in the transportation industry for almost 2 decades. He came to Caltrans after 8 years at the Tennessee Department of Transportation. In December of 2019, Toks became the chair of the Council on Active Transportation at AASHTO, or the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. He was appointed to that chair role after being the vice chair for several years, and also serving as the inaugural chair of AASHTO's Multimodal Task Force. He's also on the board of America Walks, the Lowe's, Minetta Transportation Institute, and ITS World Congress. He's also advised the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis through its Transportation Council Board. Toks is a true champion for active transportation, so great to have him help us kick off the event today. Let's hear from him now.
Hey there, good day. Welcome to the Active Transportation Symposium. I'm Toks, the Caltrans director. I'm glad to help kick off this 3-day focus on active transportation, an extremely important part of our transportation network. Over the past few years, there's been increasing acknowledgement of active transportation as a necessary part of any world-class transportation system. The time is now to make transformative changes for communities that make bicycling and walking safer and easier. Walking and bicycling will also help us build healthy communities and meet our climate goals. Whether someone is walking 1 block to a friend's house, taking transit to the grocery store, or riding a bike 10 miles to get to their job, we know, when done right, active transportation can enable everyone to depart from their destination safely without depending on a car. Active transportation also touches each one of our 5 priorities. These priorities, as you know, are safety, modality, innovation, efficiency, and partnerships. Caltrans staff rely on these priorities as our framework, shaping efforts within our programs. And more apparent than ever, active transportation issues are inherently equity issues. We know that underserved communities, often communities of color, disproportionately use active transportation modes. According to a preliminary study by our department, black pedestrians are 62% more likely to be killed by an errant vehicle. And those earning less than $50,000 in California are 2 times more likely to be killed as a pedestrian and 59% more likely to be killed as a bicyclist than other higher earning groups. The unacceptable numbers and our safety culture shift have prompted us to adopt a safe systems approach, which recognizes that humans make mistakes and are vulnerable. Earlier this year, we adopted our strategic plan 2020 to 2024. One goal we share within this document is to enhance and connect the multimodal transportation network. A toolbox we created for transportation practitioners focuses on proven pedestrian safety countermeasures, including changes in areas such as signal timing, road signs, roadway designs, and pedestrian crossings across California. Last year, the California Transportation Commission, the CTC, adopted a $100 million allocation in the State Highway Operations and Protection Program, also known as the SHOP, for complete streets elements. Because the SHOP, at its core, is a highway operational improvement program, it's especially significant that this funding has been reserved solely for complete streets. The 2020 SHOP also required every project submission to be evaluated for the need and practicality of bike ped and transit features. Of the 363 SHOP projects across the state, 41% had active transportation features. However, there's still more work to be done. We need to strive for complete streets and active transportation elements to be the standard in every project development. For the first time, the 2021 State Highway Management Strategic Plan establishes targets to track progress towards new bikeways, sidewalks, and crosswalks, and to direct funding towards those areas with immediate bicycling and walking needs. Our Caltrans team, whose arms stretch the length of our great state, is working on plans to identify active transportation improvements on, across, or parallel to the state highway system. We're identifying walking and bicycling needs on and around highways, and any needs identified will inform the project development process. And plans are not static. Data and information in the plans will be periodically updated in partnership with communities. Each district will have their own CAP plan by June 2022. We are thrilled that California leads the nation in its dedication of state transportation resources towards active transportation. And it's a privilege to do this meaningful work shoulder to shoulder with so many dedicated partners, including local transit agencies, community-based organizations, advocacy groups, and even public health providers. We also greatly value the collaboration between our Division of Local Assistance and the CTC, together administering the Active Transportation Program. Thank you again, Sacramento State's College of Continuing Education and Caltrans' Division of Local Assistance for putting together this important recognition and focus on active transportation. As with all our efforts, our partners are vital. I look forward to seeing what we as ATP proponents can do together for our public in this space. Thank you.
So great to see Toks getting out there on his bike. Our next speaker is the third Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency, also known as CalSTA, Secretary David Kim. Secretary Kim was appointed to his role in April 2019. And prior to this, David spent nearly 8 years in senior level roles at the US DOT. He also spent several years in California working at LA Metro. So now let's hear from Secretary Kim.
Hello, I'm David Kim, Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Active Transportation Symposium. I'm so glad all of you are ready to roll up your sleeves and tackle an incredibly important and timely topic. And it's my strong belief that expanding access to safe walking and biking options is absolutely critical to shaping our future vision of transportation in California. I'm happy to say that at the state level, we are on the verge of a big sea change when it comes to transportation planning, decision-making, and project selection. And this is going to happen under the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPDI, which we put out just a few months ago. CAPDI is a high-level framework that calls on all of us to move in a different direction when it comes to investing our discretionary transportation dollars. The goal is to create a sustainable transportation system that is cleaner, more equitable, and more resilient to the impacts of climate change. This is a big departure from the past. And CAPDI stems from the governor's climate change executive orders, which direct us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in transportation. Now, we all know the data point. Roughly half of all emissions come from the transportation sector. So that means transportation needs to be a huge part of the solution. We're in a climate crisis, and time is not on our side. But the good news is that active transportation is one of the most important tools available to us. It's mentioned prominently as a strategy in CAPDI as well as the executive order. And that's simply because active transportation will help us do so much more to improve public health, safety, equity, and of course, reduce emissions. CAPDI offers a roadmap in terms of how we can move forward. It calls on us to invest in networks of safe and accessible bike and pedestrian infrastructure, especially by closing gaps on portions of the state highway system that come together with local active transportation networks. And to do all of this with a strong focus on making investments in low-income and disadvantaged neighborhoods throughout the state. CAPDI also acknowledges that the active transportation program is heavily oversubscribed and underfunded. And it commits us to working closely with all stakeholders to find long-term, sustainable funding solutions. It's also worth mentioning that Caltrans and CalSTA are investing more for active transportation through the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, also known as SHOP. You will soon see new design guidance on traffic calming measures that will encourage more walking and biking through a safe systems approach. We're also moving with a sense of urgency to address troubling safety trends involving pedestrians and bicyclists. Over the past 10 years, we've seen a nearly 50% increase in pedestrian deaths and serious injuries. And bike fatalities have increased by 61%. These numbers are disturbing, and it underscores the importance of expanding the network of accessible biking and walking options and making them as safe as possible. And speaking of safety, here's a point I'd like to emphasize. As we advance more bike infrastructure, let's keep in mind that not all bike lanes are created equally. And I very much believe we have to do everything possible to promote protected bike lanes. If we're going to encourage more people to bike, they've got to feel safe while they're out there on the road. I've talked to many bicyclists, and they don't always feel safe while they're riding, even in places with dedicated bike lanes. And I think we all know that protected bike lanes are the ultimate form of safe biking infrastructure. So we need to strongly encourage project sponsors to advance them as much as possible. Yes, they're more expensive. And yes, protected bike lanes oftentimes require taking away a travel lane for vehicles. But if we're serious about prioritizing the movement of people over the movement of vehicles, that's what we've got to do. I also want to mention that the transportation package in the governor's California Comeback Plan proposed historic investments in active transportation. Unfortunately, negotiations with the legislature did not lead to a final agreement on the transportation package, including active transportation. But the governor looks forward to re-engaging with the legislature next year to pass a comprehensive transportation package, and I fully expect active transportation will be an important part of that effort. Because quite frankly, there is no version of the transportation system we're trying to create in California where active transportation does not play a major role. And the call to action to expand safe and accessible walking and biking infrastructure is exactly why we're all here. I want to wish all of you a productive symposium, and let's resolve to go all out in the months and years ahead to make our vision of a safe, sustainable, equitable, and accessible transportation system a reality. Thank you.
Really great to hear from Secretary Kim. Thank you so much, Secretary. And next, I'd like to introduce the chair of the California Transportation Commission, Hillary Norton. Hillary brings over 28 years of experience in transportation and community development to her role on the commission as FAST's founding executive director since 2008. Chair Norton has mobilized a diverse coalition of business, labor, civic groups, educational institutions, and transit organizations to support policy and infrastructure improvements to LA's mobility, livability, and economic prosperity. I'm very pleased to introduce Hillary Norton for some live remarks.
Thank you, Jeannie. It's such a pleasure working with you and a pleasure to be here today. I'm thrilled to be here to help kick off the Active Transportation Symposium. It's a pleasure working with Caltrans and CalSTA to address climate change through active transportation and other infrastructure investments. I'm really looking forward to the discussions and want to compliment staff on the wonderful program they have organized for us all. Active transportation is such a critical part of our state's transportation system, and it has been a priority for the California Transportation Commission, especially over the last year, as the COVID-19 pandemic and the state's goals to reduce emissions have heightened the need for safe pedestrian and bicycle travel in communities throughout California. We've been honored this year to implement an equity advisory roundtable whose members are advising us on pedestrian and bicycle safety and the opportunities for additional equitable investment in these projects throughout California. One of the topics for today's panel discussions is building strong community partnerships, something that is central to the work of the Commission's extraordinary ATP team. In preparation for Cycle 5, Commission staff held 21 workshops and 60 project site visits across the state, focusing specifically on communities that have been traditionally understood. Staff held tailored workshops in disadvantaged communities and rural areas, aiming to troubleshoot community-specific challenges in developing successful active transportation program applications, and found, after all applications were reviewed, that this generally helped applicants increase their scores. I'm pleased to say that our wonderful staff during COVID, the ATP staff allowed extra time for applications, but held themselves to the demanding deadlines to score and fund projects to make sure that those projects could get funded quickly. Unfortunately, limiting funding meant that many of these worthy projects in underserved communities still were not funded. And that brings me to another very important issue I wanted to highlight. As many of you probably are aware, the Commission has been working to secure additional funds so that we can fund more active transportation program projects across the state. We have a huge funding shortfall in this program and a large backlog of projects. In Cycle 5, for example, which the Commission adopted earlier this year, we received $2.3 billion in funding requests and had only about $450 million available. As a result, the program was extremely competitive. The project cutoff score was an astounding 92 points for the statewide component. We want to fund as many projects as we could that demonstrate that they met the evaluation criteria. So we unanimously adopted a motion to secure $2 billion in one-time funding as part of the governor's budget, where we also wanted to use some money for transformative pilot projects such as bicycle highways and connected multimodal networks. Unfortunately, we did not receive additional funds in this budget, as Secretary Kim described, but CTC at our October meeting has once again unanimously supported a new motion for $2 billion in ATP and transformative pilot project funding through the general fund, and hope that that can be funded next year. We have so many projects that we've already reviewed and are ready to be funded to get underway if we only had the funds available. We really appreciate all of our partner agencies and stakeholders who supported our effort and continue to support our new motion to secure more funds, and hope that we can all work together again to advance this effort. It has been a pleasure working with CalSTA and Caltrans on the Complete Streets programs in the shop and on CAPDI goals, along with our dedication to together supporting more active transportation program funds and to seek expanded opportunities to provide network supporting projects. I really appreciate everyone's attendance today and participation, and I look forward to the many ways that we are going to make active transportation even stronger throughout California. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Wonderful to have you, and I know we'll hear from you more tomorrow. So really appreciate you making the time to help kick us off. And I'm just thrilled to have all three of our leaders of our state transportation agencies join us and help dedicate this event this morning. So what a great way to kick off the event. Thank you. All right, and I'm going to quickly go over the agenda for what we have in store over the next few hours and then the next 2 days. As I mentioned earlier, each of our days has a theme: connect, visualize, and transform. Today is about connecting. You'll hear first from our keynote speaker, Monique Lopez, very shortly. Then we've got 2 panel sessions later in the morning on building strong community partnerships and demonstration projects. Please use the webinar links that were emailed to you yesterday to access these panel sessions at their start times. In fact, I may just correction, I think there was a new email that went out this morning just with an updated link. So check your email for the best links. For your convenience, we put a downloadable PDF in the related content widget that also contains the upcoming panel session links. So you can find it, should be able to find it right in the platform here. Tomorrow's theme is visualize. That day, we will be about visualizing the changes we need to see and making actions towards achieving them. You'll hear first about safety from our keynote speaker, Angie Schmidt, as well as our first panel session. And then we'll also talk about implementing quick build projects in our second panel. And finally, on Thursday, the theme is transform. We will look at network connectivity with panel sessions on bike highways and connecting active transportation and transit. There's also built-in networking session in the morning that you won't want to miss. And with that, I hope you are looking forward to what's in store over the next few days. Each session will bring unique perspectives, and it is our goal that you will take away some implementable solutions to create better active transportation in all of our communities across California. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Monique G. Lopez, a social justice planner and the founder of Pueblo Planning, an anti-racist, values-driven, participatory planning and design firm that intentionally engages and includes communities that are often left out of the planning process and those most vulnerable to the impacts of planning decisions. For the past 15 years, Monique has been a social justice planner and policy advocate, working on transportation justice, environmental justice, public space access projects, plans, policies, and designs. Monique is a great friend of mine. You're just going to love what they have to share with you this morning. Their presentation is titled Making Meaningful Planning Connections Through Relationships, Respect, Repair, and Reciprocity. With that, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Monique.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, for that warm welcome. And good morning, everyone. So great to be with you all this morning. And it is a real pleasure to share this space with you all. Really, the hope of my time with you is really to share the importance of how to make meaningful planning connections, really by sharing my own personal story and how I became familiar with planning, but also sharing my experience as well as a planning practitioner in this space as well. So buckle up or put on your bike helmet, I should say, and let's get ready to go. So Pueblo Planning is a participatory planning and design firm, which is really rooted in this principle that the voices of community members should be respected as experts, and they really should dictate the present and future of their community. And I'll talk about more in terms of what that means and looks like in planning practice as well. And really, you know, before I get into more of the details of the 4 pillars of Pueblo Planning and how that builds connections with not only community members, but builds connections between community members and public agencies or community-based organizations, I really want to share a little bit about my own origin story and how it's influenced the work that I do at Pueblo Planning. Really, Pueblo Planning is the culmination of both my personal lived experiences, but also what I have seen both as an advocate and planning practitioner in this space the past 15, 16, and every time I give a talk, I have to add another year. So I think we're on 17 years now. So with that, I'm gonna take a step back and share a little bit of my own origin story. So I grew up in Imperial County. How many of you are familiar with Imperial County? And I know that we're using the Q&A feature, so feel free to use that as an interactive chat feature as well. So I grew up in Imperial County out by the Salton Sea. And while growing up, I didn't know that our community was labeled an environmental justice community, even though my body knew what that meant in terms of someone who has had asthma from a young age and have had to use, have had to really, make sure that I'm up on my physicals and I have the proper medication and all of that. And also the bodies of my neighbors as well, who had elevated levels of cancer or asthma as well. And so I grew up in an environmental justice community. And, after grad school, first in my family to have gone away to college, I went back to my hometown and was only supposed to stay there for about 6 months, but I ended up staying there for about 3.5 years. And the reason is a family friend of mine invited me to a community-led meeting, which was at a bar, right, where all revolutions start. So I'm from a pretty small community, and there was only one bar in town. And so that's where we had this community-led meeting. And people were really concerned about what was being proposed in our community. A company wanted to come in and build a sewage sludge incinerator. Sewage sludge is basically the stuff at the bottom of a wastewater treatment plant. And they wanted to import that sewage sludge from all over Southern California, import it into my hometown and burn it, and then call it renewable energy. And it doesn't take much of a scientist to understand that burning this waste product, which has heavy metals and other toxins in it, is not good for both, for any living creature, both human and plant life and animal life as well. So I went to this community meeting at this bar. There was a lot of screaming, yelling, talking, people really impassioned with what was going on. And I didn't quite understand what was going on at first. So I ended up staying after the meeting. There's about 10 people left. And then I started to learn what was being proposed in my hometown. So with about these handful of people, we started a grassroots group, really to first research what was being proposed, but also to better understand who were the policymakers that were allowing these decisions to move forward, and what was the process in which this type of industry was moving forward. So in this time, a friend of mine and I, Rosie Nava, we co-authored a ballot initiative to stop the importation of this kind of waste into Imperial County, because where we lived was in an unincorporated area. And so the County Board of Supervisors had jurisdiction over that. So we had to go to a countywide ballot. But in that process, in order for us to better understand what was being proposed and where this industry was in its permitting process, I would find myself at the county planning department. Before this time, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as planning. I didn't know who planners were. And I went to the planning department because I was told that's where you can get information on these things. And as I mentioned, this is about 16, 17 years ago. So I go to the planning department, I go up to the counter, and I'm asking for some information about this facility. But because I didn't have the language of planning, I was told that they didn't have what I was asking for. So I'd go back 3, 4, 5 times using different phrases that I was looking up and trying to understand, like, what is the exact language that I need in order to access the information for myself and my community, right? And also during this time as well, I am learning that what was being proposed in my community had been planned 5, 10 years prior. But the way a lot of planning happened in my community and in other communities as well is that there'd be a small little notice in the newspaper saying public hearing that would happen 30 miles away at the county seat. And then it would happen in the middle of the day while working people aren't able to go. And so we're talking about transportation as well, right? If you have something that's 30 miles away, we only have one bus that gets us there, and it doesn't come very frequently, and not always everyone has access to vehicles as well. How are we supposed to engage in this process? So I learned about planning during this time from having kind of these disempowering experiences in terms of being shut out of having information because I didn't have the specific planning technical language. And then 2, realizing and understanding that that all these efforts had been planned without us, with this perception that it was open to the public to really engage and participate. While I'm having that disempowering experience, I'm also having a simultaneous empowering experience. And at this time, I'm working with my neighbors. I'm working with community members across the county who are all concerned about this industry coming in. And from this experience, I'm hearing folks share what is their vision for their community, and having them share ideas and having them share strategies of how to accomplish those ideas as well. So as I'm having this disempowering experience, I'm also having simultaneously this very empowering experience where I come to understand and realize that community members have a vision for their community, and they have expertise to share in help shaping what that vision is. But oftentimes the way these planning processes are set up, they're set up for disconnection. They're set up to disconnect people from actually being able to shape an outcome in a meaningful way. And so this was early on my experience in planning. And I'll get to the punchline of this story. And there's a billion stories I could tell of what happened in those 3.5 years. But ultimately, our ballot initiative was successful in Imperial County, passed by 68% of the countywide voters. And so now Imperial County is protected from that kind of industry ever coming in. So that was my first taste in planning. I went on to work on actually in Los Angeles doing important freight transportation advocacy work. And again, I run into these folks, these creatures called planners, right? That are, are making these decisions behind the scenes, that are tasked with also ensuring that the community is engaged in this. But I'm seeing that the way in which these structures are laid out inherently leave people that are like from my community out of the decision-making process. So I'm having this experience again, and I'm meeting these folks called planners again. I'm like, who are these planners? And why is their role incredibly important in terms of what that means for environmental justice communities such as my own as well? So I decided to go back to school and study planning so I can understand the language and the process of planning as well. And in that studying, I come to this realization, it doesn't have to be that difficult. It doesn't have to be that difficult in terms of communicating a particular vision or facilitating a process. There's ways in which we can make this more accessible. And there's ways in which, as planners, we can serve as connectors between those that are in the positionality of making these decisions in terms of budgetary decisions or in terms of policy or programmatic decisions. We can play an important connector role between them and the community, particularly communities that are often left out of these conversations itself. So before starting Pueblo Planning, I spent about 13 years or so working at environmental justice, community-based organization groups that focus on social justice work. And again, found myself running into planners as well. And oftentimes we'd be, working at a community-based organization, planning firms would come to us or public agencies would come to us and say, hey, bring your community members over to this meeting. And we do that. And then they wouldn't be sharing with us the intention of how they were going to use that information. And a lot of times we wouldn't even get to see a copy of the final report or know how that community input was integrated into and helped shape that particular plan as well. So it was very exploitative in that. And so from both, my personal experience in my first interaction with planning and with the planner in particular, and then moving on towards working at a community-based organization, environmental justice groups, how planners and related to us and to community members, I felt like something was wrong. I felt like something was broken. I felt that there was a great disconnect in terms of ensuring that there's meaningful engagement and input in how our communities are shaped. And so that really, those kind of 13 years was really really helped me inform and shape the way in which we do our work at Pueblo Planning. I'm going to share how we do our work at Pueblo Planning. So if relationships, repair, reciprocity, and respect are our pillars, I would say the foundation of our work is intentional inclusion. So what does that mean? At Pueblo Planning, we intentionally engage individuals that are going to be potentially most impacted from any kind of planning, policy, budgetary, or design decision, whatever it may be. And quite typically, that includes individuals who maybe come from low wealth backgrounds, individuals who are Black, Indigenous, or non-Black people of color. It could also include individuals in the queer and trans community. It could include individuals who are unhoused. It could also include individuals with varying disabilities, right? So depending upon the project, we're really looking to seek and reach out to folks who could potentially be most impacted by any decision that is made. This particular framework is really taken from the Othering and Belonging Institute's framework around, they call it targeted universalism. And where you have this universal goal, right, that let's say it's to make biking and walking safer for everyone within a particular community or neighborhood, right? That's the universal goal. But it's targeted in the sense that who are you intentionally reaching out to and including at the table, right? And whose voices are being centered is very key and important. So, for example, we did this project a few years back with a large transit agency around trying to understand how women travel. And this large agency wanted to use this research to inform policies, budgets, programs in order to make it more accessible and safe for women traveling. In this process, we intentionally engaged women who were unhoused. We intentionally engaged women with disabilities and intentionally engaged women with various immigration and documentation status, identifying these three groups as probably those individuals that would be most impacted from these types of decisions. And all of them were transit core riders, right? And from these conversations, what they shared specifically around safety came down to improving efficiency of transit, improving lighting was key as well, right? There was others that also did a similar study as well. They did a survey, but they did not intentionally include these particular populations. And they included a lot of folks who were non-transit riders, upper middle class white women. The way they defined safety was really around having more transit police in these spaces. And so whereas those that we connected with shared other strategies, which also included unarmed customer service agents as well at the transit stops. And so if the agency were to implement the strategies and recommendations that the women we intentionally engaged, that would actually improve transit for everyone. But if it were to only implement and activate the suggestions and strategies that folks who are in a greater positionality of privilege, that would only benefit that few handful of folks within that particular positionality. So intentional inclusion is super key in all the work we do. So I want to move us to the first pillar at Pueblo Planning, and that is relationships. Relationships being really key to all we do. As I mentioned, because we are intentionally engaging particular communities, we understand that in order to be able to make these meaningful connections, you need to have relationships with those community members themselves in order to get into these conversations that really could be very vulnerable for people to share as well. So oftentimes what we do is we partner with community-based organizations, and we ensure that in both our budget and timeline, we can adequately compensate those CBOs, but we can also ensure that we can adequately, within the timeline, adequately collaborate as well with those CBOs as well. And in this process, CBOs are able to both connect us with community members that they have long-term relationships with, but they are also able to inform the way in which we should be in relationship with community members. And I'll talk a bit about more of that under repair as well. But the other thing I want to note as well, it's not just about connecting to community members for the sake of doing this engagement process. The other thing that we really see our role at Pueblo Planning doing is really about ensuring that we serve as connectors between the community and community-based organizations and our clients. So whether it be a public agency or an advocacy organization or what have you, right? We see our role as connector, and I'm going to give you an example of how we've recently have done that. We were working on a project team working on the West Hollywood Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And one of the things in terms of our intentional inclusion is we wanted to ensure that the Tongva people whose land West Hollywood is on, right, were included in shaping the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. So we, partially one is through a relationship that I've been able to cultivate years prior, where it was able to partner with Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples, who then connected us with folks that they're in relationship with, Tongva folks who they're in relationship with. But through this process as well, I was able to hand off those relationships to the project manager at the city and to other city staff as well, who were now in conversation on other things that are outside of the scope of Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And now they're in conversation and building a relationship, talking about harm as well that has been done, and talking about strategies as well outside of even our project scope around climate action and adaptation planning of how that harm can be repaired as well. So that relationship is now being cultivated there. So I really see our role as planners as not just connecting with community in order to, inform a plan, but really how do we connect those communities, those community-based organizations with our clients as well, so that the impact of that relationship outlives any particular planning timeline or project, and that those relationships be deeply rooted with those partners. So relationships being really key from beginning to end, and also beyond the life of the project. So I want to talk a bit about repair. And what does that mean and look like? Planning can be this really extractive process where you go into a community at best and you ask community members to share a particular experience. Now, many of you are in the active transportation field. So when you're asking community members to share about their experience walking and biking, they may be sharing with you a traumatic experience of what it means, maybe an incident that happened. Maybe they were hit by a vehicle, maybe a loved one was injured by a vehicle or was killed, right? And it could be a very extractive process. And at public planning, we want to be really mindful of not practicing extraction as we're in community with community members, right? As we're working with them in these engagement processes. So we really see our role in order to make those connections, meaningful connections. We see our role as a facilitator, but really as facilitators who are ensuring spaces of healing. So I've got a picture up here. This is from one of our projects where in most of our work, and I would say probably like 95 to 98% of our work, we always use storytelling and art making as forms of ways that people can communicate their lived experience, their vision for their community, and recommendations and strategies. So again, going back to my origin story, we're not requiring people to have to understand and utilize the language, technical language of planning, right? Which in active transportation, there is a lot of technical language, right? That's used, and sometimes we're not as mindful of it because it's been ingrained in our everyday vernacular, right? So we try to use images. We facilitate opportunities for folks to share their own personal narratives, and then we transition those stories into strategies with community members. And so through this art making and storytelling process, what it does is it allows really these spaces where community members' stories can be validated as well. So at this particular meeting, as folks were sharing their story about what it's like to take public transit as someone who identifies as a woman in LA, somebody might share a traumatic experience, but as they were sharing that, somebody else would say, hey, that happened to me. And then another person would say, that happened to me, and this is what I did. In that experience, people are being validated in terms of their own lived experience, but they are also in real time troubleshooting for one another strategies that can be helpful moving forward as well. And so really, how are we as planners, as facilitators, allowing the breadth and space for community members to have their stories validated in that space, but also be able to troubleshoot and come up with solutions in real time to address issues in ways that they're able to address in their day-to-day life. The other thing as well that we do in terms of repair is that we do trauma-informed facilitation, meaning that before we even enter a room with community members, we have a conversation with their community-based organization partners, and we ask them, are there any triggers or traumas that we should be aware of going into this space, that we need to be mindful of, and even be careful about maybe certain language that we're using in this space and how we talk about certain things as well. Are there any things, any conversations that may come up that require maybe certain resources we should have in our back pocket in order to share with these individuals as well? But lastly, in terms of repair, it's not just about facilitation and not just about ensuring a welcoming and safe space, but it's really ensuring as we write these planning documents, right, that in our planning narratives, we acknowledge the harm that has been done and that may also be continually happening within these communities. We write and we document that. We honor those narratives of harm. But not only just documenting those narratives, but also that ensuring that every single solution that is presented in those documents, asking ourselves and checking in with community, how are these solutions going to repair these particular harms as well? So I want to go to respect. What does respect mean and look like, right? For us, respect really means and looks like setting up scenarios in which community members' expertise can shine. So I also teach at a couple universities, and I always pull this picture up of one of our workshops we did with street vendors in MacArthur Park. And I asked my students, who's the planner in this space? And sometimes they go, oh, well, we don't see the planner. And some of my more clever students say, well, they're all the planner. And I say, you're absolutely right. They're all the planner. So really our role is to set up, facilitate spaces where community expertise is centered and shines. How many of you have been, or maybe even have been guilty of this, right? Have been to a meeting where the planner drones on for about 30, 40 minutes with the PowerPoint deck, and then community members are left at the end of the meeting with very limited amount of time to provide input, or then they're told to write on a comment card, right? Really for us, respect is not centering ourselves. Yeah, sure, we need to maybe sometimes provide some grounding so that folks are able to share their vision and share their stories, but how are we facilitating spaces so that community members' expertise can shine, right? But another way that we show respect is as we share with community members in terms of that grounding, we are transparent in terms of the timeline of a project. We're transparent in terms of the purpose of a project, and also transparent about what are the ways in which the community members can actually influence the outcomes of a project, right? What are the parameters within that as well? And lastly, as well, in terms of respect, is that we always go back to community and we share with them, one, to check our work. Did we understand this right? Did we get this right? But also to ensure, and this is really important, is the feedback loop, right? So that they know how what they shared specifically helped shape those planning outcomes and strategies, and whatever they may be. So that they know exactly what they shared shaped those outcomes as well, which is a respectful thing to do, right? And lastly, I want to talk about reciprocity. So reciprocity really means, ensuring mutual benefit, right? Or really, it comes from this, indigenous concept around being in right relationship too, with people in place. So how do we ensure reciprocity, mutual benefit, not only for public planning, not only for our clients, but most importantly for the community as part of this planning process. So with reciprocity, bare minimum is that we always put in our budgets compensation for community members who are attending and participating in listening sessions or one-on-one interviews, but I would say that's the bare minimum of reciprocity. Reciprocity also looks like in practice, and again, this is really key for building those meaningful connections and also establishing trust with community members as well. But reciprocity also means for us, as folks are sharing maybe a particular need, we don't just go as planners, take notes and then move on to the next thing, or just take notes and then implement, write about that in our report. We were working, so this is a picture of a project we did last year. We were working with LISC San Diego, co-developing with community members and community-based organization an economic recovery and resilience plan for the community of City Heights. And with that, and here we are, this was not this past summer, but the summer before. So in the thick of the pandemic, okay? And folks are sharing with us, when we're talking about economic recovery and resilience, folks are sharing with us their current lived experiences. So as folks shared with us, you know what, I'm experiencing food insecurity. I'm not able to, I lost my job. I'm not able to purchase groceries this week. We didn't just take note of it, right? But we see also our role as planners, as social workers as well. And so we had a list of resources and services available to us. So as folks shared particular needs that they had then and there, we also asked, hey, I heard that you are having trouble, purchasing food this week. Would it be okay if I shared with you a phone number of an organization that's connecting people to food and other important, resources? And most of the time people would say, yes, thank you so much. So not just listening and taking notes, but taking action, using our own positionality and our own networks to connect people to those resources as well. And then lastly with it as well, I do want to share in terms of reciprocity, I'll provide another example from this project as well. So not only as people are sharing particular needs, but also identifying maybe what are some collective needs and providing that information, maybe perhaps before even people ask. So we were calling up all the community members that we had connected with, sharing with them one-on-one, actually on the phone, how what they shared was implemented into this economic recovery and resilience plan. And as we had them on the phone, it was during the time that the vaccine was rolling out. And there was a lot of questions, if you remember back then, right? Not too long ago, but feels a while ago for some of us, right? Is that there was a lot of question on who was eligible and then where can we get the vaccine, right? And so particularly in communities, and in this project, we worked with folks that spoke 6 different, or people who from 6 different types of sub-communities within this one larger community, so 6 different languages. And as we had them on the phone sharing how their feedback was integrated into this plan, we also asked them, hey, the vaccine just is now becoming available. Do you have any questions on eligibility or how to get connected? I mean, many people were like, yes, I have questions. So we quite literally had the county website open, answering folks' questions to the best of our ability. And we actually helped schedule some vaccination appointments for some of the folks that were eligible at that time as well, who were having trouble navigating the county website to do so themselves. So that's reciprocity. How do we ensure that there is mutual benefit in our time together, right? And sometimes it's not the things that are written into the scope of work as a planner. And sometimes, as someone maybe who writes a request for proposal, that element of reciprocity is not in there. And so sometimes when we include that in a budget or what have you, folks are like, why does this line item here, or why does this cost so much? It's because we're ensuring that both in timeline and budget, that reciprocity is in how we do our work as well. So I'd love to open it up to any questions that folks may have. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to listen this morning, listen to my own personal story, but also see the ways in which that our foundation at Pueblo is built and the 4 key pillars at Pueblo Planning. And I tell you, you know, since we've been moving forward with that foundation and pillars, we have built incredibly meaningful connections with community members, but also connections that our partners and our clients as well are maintaining well beyond the scope of any project as well. So thank you all.
All right, thank you. My name is Emily Abrahams, and I'll be facilitating some Q&A with Monique. We only have about 5 minutes left, so hopefully we can get to about 2 questions. So once again, Monique, thank you so much for this really powerful presentation. I wanted to start with one comment that was received in the Q&A. Someone stated, "I love that you are helping community and staff build relationships with each other. I wish more agency staff saw the value in that." And I thought that really was a great comment and definitely an outcome of what your presentation means. So thank you. The first question I'll read here is, what happens when the community in general is underinformed or misinformed? How do we include people who believe things like 5G towers causing health issues when planning to increase communications and connectivity infrastructure?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. We're actually right now in the process of working with the local air pollution control district in San Diego to develop a public participation plan. And one of the questions that we're engaging folks in is asking them where their trusted sources of information is. But we're also asking them what are ways in which they themselves and the community at large can build trust with the public agency itself. And with that as well, a couple things. One is in terms of misinformation that's out there, is identifying places and where that misinformation maybe is being shared, and maybe seeing like as well if you can occupy that space a little bit to share out factual information. But the other thing as well that we're consistently hearing from community is, particularly in this case with the Air Pollution Control District, is they're just saying, come to our meetings to just check in, our monthly meetings that we already have established. So having an ongoing and consistent presence builds that trust and relationship, and I think is one of the greatest things to combat misinformation that we're seeing spread quite aggressively, particularly on online platforms. So I think those consistent and long-term, like literally showing up in these spaces, even if you don't have a project right now that is in that neighborhood or community, is how do you continue to be plugged in and build those relationships even outside of a particular planning process or project. Continue to show up.
Great, thank you. One more question. What is your observation around translating public outreach content, such as a project website or fact sheets or presentation boards? If a public agency has a limited budget, it makes sense to translate the content that will most be distributed.
I think translation should certainly always be a priority, but I think we need to think about translation in 2 ways. One is just, in terms of language access, in terms of, ensuring that it's in the language in which people speak. But the second thing too is, are we translating technical terms? Are we defining those concepts in our translation itself? It's not enough to just translate I was having this conversation last night, translate the concept, crosswalk scramble. Like, what does that mean, right? But it's important that we use language, whether it be in English or other languages, that define what these concepts are. And the thing I would say as well is that looking to see who those communities are that are going to be most impacted. So again, that intentional engagement and identifying maybe what are the language access needs within those communities. And you can easily do that, right, in terms of looking at census data, right? And so having it part of your process on the front end, where one, there's a budget for translation. Like in a community like City Heights, you're going to need a larger budget for translation than maybe in a community like Barrio Logan, which is maybe just English and Spanish. In City Heights, you're going to need a much heftier budget. So being mindful, using census data and all to inform what your budgetary projections and decisions are, but also ensuring that you're identifying those intentional communities to engage. So, and lastly, again, just to reiterate, translation should be twofold. It's not about just translating, these technical terms, but even in a dominant language like English, that we're also ensuring that the way in which these concepts are communicated, that they're well defined and accessible for community members.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, we are out of time. There are so many great questions coming in, so we'll make sure that Monique gets them. But once again, Monique, thank you so much for this incredible presentation. Again, with the comments coming in, I think people really took a lot of value from this and will hopefully apply it to their work. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you and your willingness this morning to share with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. And if anyone wants to continue the conversation, feel free to email me and we can certainly do that offline.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Well, we have about 3 minutes until our next session begins. So the updated link was sent to you this morning. This was the one that was incorrect before. So please check your email, grab that link, and we'll see you at 9:45. Thanks.